Hello, everyone. Good morning. There comes a moment in every life when strength runs out, when plans fall apart, and when the road ahead looks uncertain. It is in that moment when you realize you don't have all the answers that God is inviting you to stop trying to control everything and let Him lead you. God was never meant to be a backup plan, a last resort, or a helper you call only when life becomes difficult. He was always meant to lead. Many people believe in God, pray to God, and even talk about trusting God, yet still insist on controlling the direction of their own lives. They invite God into their plans instead of surrendering to His purpose. They ask Him to bless what they have already decided, rather than waiting for His guidance. But the truth is this: when God is only assisting, you remain in charge. And when you remain in charge, you limit what God can do. Leadership means authority. It means direction. It means surrendering the steering wheel. God cannot truly lead a life that refuses to release control. You cannot follow God and insist on setting the destination at the same time. Too often, people want God's power without God's direction, God's promises without God's process, and God's blessings without God's authority. But a divided life cannot experience full guidance. When God is treated as an assistant, He is consulted only after decisions are made. He is brought in when things fall apart. He is asked to fix what human wisdom broke. This approach leads to frustration because God does not exist to clean up our messes. He exists to guide us away from them. When you allow God to lead from the beginning, you avoid many battles you were never meant to fight. God's leadership does not mean you will understand every step. It means you trust His character even when you don't see the outcome. Leadership requires humility, and humility requires admitting that you don't know everything. When you let God lead, you are acknowledging that His wisdom is greater than your experience. His timing is better than your urgency, and His plan is more complete than your ideas. Many people struggle with letting God lead because control feels safe. Control gives the illusion of security, but control is also exhausting. It places the weight of outcomes, decisions, and consequences entirely on your shoulders. God never designed you to carry that burden alone. Leadership by God brings rest, not because life becomes easy, but because responsibility is shared with the one who sees the end from the beginning. Letting God lead also requires patience. God does not rush to satisfy impatience, and He does not move according to pressure. When He leads, He shapes character before success and obedience before breakthrough. Sometimes God will say no, not because He wants to withhold something, but because He wants to protect you from something you cannot yet see. When God leads, your life becomes aligned instead of scattered. Your decisions begin to reflect purpose instead of impulse. Your prayers change from demands to dependence. You stop asking God to follow your plans and start asking Him to form your path. That shift changes everything. God's leadership does not remove responsibility. It redefines it. You still act, plan, and move forward, but you do so under His direction. You walk by faith instead of fear. You move with confidence instead of anxiety. You trust that even when doors close, God is still guiding your steps. The greatest freedom in life is not found in being in control, but in being led by the one who cannot fail. When God leads, your life is no longer driven by pressure, comparison, or panic. It is driven by purpose. God does not want to be added to your life. He wants to direct it. And the moment you stop treating Him like an assistant and start trusting Him as a leader, your life begins to move in a direction that reflects His power, His peace, and His promise. Control feels powerful, but it is often the greatest illusion we live under. From an early age, we are taught to plan, to manage, to take charge, and to depend on our own understanding. While wisdom and responsibility are important, there comes a point where self-reliance turns into self-limitation. Faith begins at the exact moment when control ends. As long as you insist on holding everything together, you leave no room for God to move. Many people say they trust God, yet their lives are filled with anxiety, fear, and constant pressure. That tension is usually a sign of too much control. When you are trying to manage outcomes that only God can handle, peace disappears. Faith is not proven by how well things are going. It is revealed by how well you trust God when you don't have answers. Releasing control is uncomfortable because it requires surrender. Surrender does not mean weakness. It means alignment. It is the decision to stop fighting for outcomes and start trusting the process God is leading you through. You don't lose direction. When you surrender, you gain clarity. Control demands certainty, but faith thrives in uncertainty because it depends on God rather than circumstances. There is a difference between preparation and control. Preparation says, I will do my part. Control says, I must determine the result. Faith allows you to prepare while still trusting God with the outcome. When you confuse preparation with control, you become exhausted trying to predict, prevent, and manipulate every possible scenario. God never asked you to manage the future. He asked you to trust Him with it. Often the reason God allows situations that strip us of control is because faith cannot grow in comfort. When everything is predictable, trust is unnecessary. Faith develops when your strength reaches its limit and you realize that only God can carry you forward. Those moments are not failures, they are invitations to deeper dependence. Control also limits obedience. When you insist on knowing every step, you delay movement. God usually reveals direction one step at a time, not because He is hiding the plan, but because He is building trust. If God showed you everything at once, you might rely on information instead of faith. When control ends, obedience begins. Releasing control does not mean life becomes chaotic. It means your life becomes anchored. You stop reacting emotionally and start responding spiritually. You begin to pray before you panic, listen before you decide, and wait before you act. Faith reshapes your response to uncertainty. God often challenges control by asking for obedience that doesn't make sense. These moments expose where trust truly lives. Will you follow even when the outcome is unclear? Will you move when the path feels unstable? Faith says yes, not because the situation is safe, but because God is faithful. The hardest part of faith is not believing that God can. It is trusting that God will, even if the result looks different from what you expected. When control ends, comparison ends. Pressure ends. Fear begins to loosen its grip. Peace enters because your confidence is no longer in your ability to manage life, but in God's ability to lead it. Faith begins. When control ends, because only then do you stop trying to be your own savior. You realize that you were never meant to hold everything together. You were meant to be held by God. And when you finally let go, you don't fall. You are caught by grace, guided by wisdom, and carried by a faith that grows stronger every step of the way. There are moments in life when God's direction feels confusing, uncomfortable, and even illogical. It challenges what you know, contradicts what you feel, and stretches what you believe is possible. God's direction often defies human logic because His wisdom operates on a higher level than human understanding. What seems unreasonable to you may be perfectly aligned with His purpose. Human logic is shaped by experience, emotion, and limitation. It evaluates situations based on what has happened before and what seems safest now. God's logic, however, is shaped by eternity. He sees what you cannot see. He understands how present obedience connects to future purpose. That is why His instructions sometimes feel backward. He may tell you to wait when you want to move, to release when you want to hold on, or to step forward when fear tells you to retreat. The greatest danger of relying solely on human logic is that it places boundaries around what God can do in your life. Logic demands proof before obedience, but faith requires obedience before proof. When God speaks, He is not asking you to understand. He is asking you to trust. Understanding often comes later, after obedience has already opened the door. Throughout life, God's direction may clash with what others expect of you. Friends may not understand your choices. People may question your decisions. Even your own thoughts may argue against what God has placed in your heart. In these moments, obedience becomes a private act of trust between you and God. Faith sometimes means standing alone. confident that God's voice is more reliable than public opinion. God's direction also challenges emotional reasoning. Emotions are powerful, but they are not reliable leaders. Fear exaggerates danger. Comfort resists change. Excitement can rush decisions. God's leading is steady, not reactive. When He guides you, He invites you to walk by faith rather than feelings. Obedience is not about how confident you feel. It is about who you trust. Often, God will lead you into situations that stretch your capacity. He may ask you to forgive when it feels impossible, to give when resources feel limited, or to serve when recognition seems absent. These instructions defy logic because they are designed to grow your faith. God is less concerned with your comfort than He is with your character. Trusting God's direction does not mean ignoring wisdom or responsibility. It means recognizing that God's wisdom surpasses human calculation. He may call you to take risks that are calculated by faith rather than fear. These steps often unlock growth that comfort never could. Obedience to God's direction positions you for experiences you could never plan on your own. Doors open that logic would never predict. Strength appears when ability runs out. Provision arrives in unexpected ways. These moments reveal that God's guidance is not random. It is intentional. The challenge is learning to move even when clarity is incomplete. God rarely provides full explanations because faith is not built on explanations. It is built on relationship. When you trust the one who is guiding you, you don't need to see the entire path. You only need to follow the next step. God's direction defies human logic because it is designed to move you beyond your limits and into His purpose. What feels uncertain now may become the testimony that strengthens others later. Obedience today becomes understanding tomorrow. And when you choose God's direction over human reasoning, you discover that His way, though challenging, is always faithful, always purposeful, and always leading you exactly where you need to be. Delays and detours can feel like interruptions, mistakes, or even failures. When progress slows or plans change unexpectedly, it is easy to assume that something has gone wrong. But in God's design, delays and detours are not signs of abandonment. They are often evidence of His involvement. What looks like a setback to you may actually be God setting something in order behind the scenes. We live in a world that celebrates speed. Faster results, quicker success, and immediate answers are seen as signs of progress. Yet God is not rushed by deadlines or pressured by expectations. His timing operates on purpose, not urgency. When God delays something, it is rarely to deny you. It is often to prepare you. Preparation takes time, and God is more committed to your growth than to your schedule. Detours are especially difficult because they force you off familiar paths. You had a plan. You knew where you were going. Then suddenly, God redirects you in a way you didn't expect. Detours challenge trust because they require flexibility. They test whether your faith is in the destination or in the one guiding the journey. God sometimes changes the route because the original path cannot support the weight of the future He has planned for you. Delays also reveal what you are leaning on. When things slow down, impatience surfaces, fear grows louder, doubt begins to question whether God is still present. But waiting is not wasted time in God's hands. Waiting strengthens endurance. It deepens prayer. It exposes motivations. In the waiting, God refines what success could never correct. Often God uses delays to protect you. There are places you want to reach and doors you want to enter that you are not yet ready to handle. If God allowed you to arrive too early, the blessing could become a burden. What you interpret as God holding back may actually be God holding you together until the right moment. Detours also bring new perspective. You meet people you wouldn't have encountered on the original path. You develop skills you didn't know you needed. You learn lessons that will later become essential. God's detours are rarely random. They are intentional adjustments designed to align you with His greater plan. The struggle comes when delays last longer than expected. That is where trust is stretched. It is easy to trust God for a moment. It is harder to trust Him over time. Yet faith grows strongest in seasons where patience is required. God often does his deepest work in the quiet seasons when nothing seems to be happening. Delays and detours also teach surrender. They remind you that you are not in control of outcomes. They shift your focus from achievement to obedience. When you stop measuring progress by speed and start measuring it by faithfulness, peace begins to replace frustration. God's design is never accidental. Every pause, every redirection, every unexpected turn has purpose. You may not understand the reason now, but clarity often comes later. What matters most is not how fast you move, but how closely you follow God's leading. In time, you will see that the delay saved you, the detour strengthened you, and the waiting shaped you. God was not late. He was precise. And when the moment arrives, you will realize that his timing, though challenging, was exactly what you needed to step into the fullness of what he prepared for you all along. Peace is something many people chase, but few truly experience. We often look for peace in stability, answers, or control, believing that if everything around us were calm, then our hearts would be too. But real peace does not come from perfect conditions. It comes from surrender. Surrender produces peace because it shifts the weight of life off your shoulders and places it into God's hands. When you try to manage everything yourself, pressure becomes constant. Every decision feels heavy because the outcome depends entirely on you. Fear grows because mistakes feel permanent. Anxiety increases because the future feels uncertain. But when you let God lead, pressure begins to loosen its grip. You realize that you are not responsible for controlling outcomes, only for obeying God's direction. Surrender does not mean giving up. It means giving over. It is the decision to trust God's leadership even when circumstances feel unstable. Peace does not come from knowing what will happen next. It comes from knowing who is guiding you. When God leads, peace becomes internal rather than circumstantial. Storms may still exist around you, but they no longer rule what is happening within you. One of the greatest misunderstandings about peace is that it arrives after problems are solved. In reality, peace often arrives before situations change. God's peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of confidence in him. That is why you can feel calm in chaos and steady in uncertainty when your trust is rooted in God rather than results. Surrender also brings peace because it ends the exhausting cycle of comparison. When you are led by God, you stop measuring your life against others. You understand that your journey is unique, your timing is intentional, and your path is purposeful. Peace grows when you stop competing and start trusting. Another reason surrender produces peace is that it simplifies life. Instead of being overwhelmed by countless choices, you focus on obedience. You stop asking, what if? And start asking, what is God asking of me right now? That clarity reduces anxiety and increases confidence, even when the future remains unclear. Peace also grows through trust built over time. Each time God carries you through a season you thought you couldn't survive, your confidence in him deepens. Each answered prayer, each unexpected provision, each moment of strength reminds you that God is faithful, that history with God becomes the foundation of peace in future storms. Letting God lead does not mean you won't feel emotions like fear or uncertainty. It means those emotions no longer control your decisions. Peace is not emotional numbness. It is spiritual assurance. It is the quiet confidence that God is present, powerful, and purposeful in every season. Surrender requires daily commitment. Peace is not a one-time achievement. It is a continual choice to trust God again and again. Each day presents opportunities to take back control or to release it. Every time you choose surrender, peace deepens. When you let God lead, peace becomes your posture, not your reaction. You stop living in survival mode and start walking in trust. Life may still be challenging, but it no longer feels crushing. You are reminded that you are never alone, never abandoned, and never beyond God's care. Surrender produces peace in every season because it anchors your life in God rather than circumstances. And when your confidence rests in Him, no storm can steal the peace that only His leadership can provide. Comfort is easy to love because it feels safe, familiar, and predictable. It allows you to stay where you are without risk or resistance. But comfort was never God's ultimate goal for your life. God's leading is not designed to keep you comfortable. It is designed to make you purposeful. Purpose often requires movement, and movement often requires courage. When God leads, He frequently invites you beyond what feels secure. He asks you to trust Him in unfamiliar territory, to step into responsibilities that stretch your abilities, and to believe in outcomes you cannot yet see. Comfort keeps you focused on preservation, but purpose calls you toward transformation. God leads you not to maintain who you are, but to shape who you are becoming. Many people resist God's leading because it disrupts what feels stable. Purpose asks hard questions. It challenges priorities. It demands growth. But God never calls you forward without also providing what you need to move forward. When He leads you into purpose, He also supplies strength, wisdom, and grace for the journey. God's leading often feels uncomfortable because it exposes fear. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of change. Comfort allows fear to remain hidden, but purpose forces it to surface. God does not expose fear to shame you. He exposes it to heal you. When you move in obedience, despite fear, faith begins to replace it. Purpose also brings responsibility. God's calling on your life is not only about personal fulfillment, it is about impact. It involves serving others, contributing to something greater, and aligning your life with God's will. That responsibility can feel heavy, but it is also meaningful. Comfort asks, what do I need? Purpose asks, who can I help? When God leads you into purpose, setbacks become lessons instead of failures. Growth rarely happens in comfort zones. Strength develops through challenge. Wisdom is gained through experience. God uses uncomfortable moments to deepen your trust and refine your character. What feels difficult now often becomes the foundation for future confidence. God's leading into purpose also reshapes identity. You begin to see yourself not by limitations, but by calling. You stop defining your life by what you fear and start defining it by what God has placed within you. Purpose gives direction to pain and meaning to sacrifice. It is important to understand that purpose does not mean constant activity or visible success. Sometimes purpose looks like waiting, serving quietly, or remaining faithful in small things. God values obedience over applause. Purpose is measured by faithfulness, not recognition. Following God's leading into purpose requires daily surrender. Each step asks you to trust again, to choose obedience over ease, and to move forward even when clarity is incomplete. God rarely reveals the entire picture at once. Purpose unfolds step by step as trust grows. Comfort promises ease, but it offers little growth. Purpose may demand sacrifice, but it produces fulfillment. When you let God lead, you discover that true satisfaction comes not from avoiding discomfort, but from living in alignment with His will. God leads you into purpose because He created you for more than survival. He created you for impact, growth, and meaning. When you follow His guidance, even the difficult moments become significant. And one day you will look back and realize that every step out of comfort brought you closer to the life you were always meant to live.